Welcome to Men Going Home. I'm Chris Wolfe, and we've got another great show for you today because we are the only show that brings you access to a segment of society very few people know anything about. Men who have spent more than 30, 35, and even 40 years in prison. We'll talk to them about their crimes, their life in prison, and what their transition back into the free world was like after all those years. However, before we introduce today's special guest, please welcome my good friend and co-host of this show, Andy Korge. Andy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be here and eager to hear the story of our friend Freddie over here in a moment.
You know, before we introduce our friend Freddie, last week's show was interesting because we brought about an interesting subject that really doesn't get much discussion, and that is, what do we do with juveniles and adolescents that commit horrific crimes? Do we continue sentencing them as adults, or do we factor in their age and maturity and sentence them accordingly? Andy, your thoughts?
Well, there's a lot of questions about that, Chris. But the statistics are staggering. There's over 48,000 minors in prison or juvenile facilities in America, and 2,000 life sentenced juveniles in prison today. And so, it's a bad and social issue. It's a problem in America, and I think there's a racial tinge to it, because if you look at the disparity between how black youths and minority youths are treated versus white youths in America, there's really a racial issue at play here as well.
Right, and even at Everglades Correctional Institution, I've met so many young men who received life sentences, and and there were extenuating circumstances, and they were treated as adults, when in fact, if they had looked a little more closely, perhaps a life sentence wasn't the appropriate sentence.
Yeah, it's a terrible issue. I mean, listen, when you have almost 50,000 of our youth incarcerated in America, it's a problem, right, and it's something that really needs to be addressed. We've talked about it before in the show, you and I, and at the age of 15 or 16 or 14, I mean, how much reasoning do you have as a young adult? And
correct.
And is there a better way to get them ready to be productive members of society, right, aside from putting them in prison for years and years?
Right. I mean, I've read information where the average person has the equal intellect as an adult at age 16. But people don't normally mature until somewhere between the ages of 18 and 29. So is it fair to treat a 15-year-old the same way we would treat a 35-year-old given the same crime?
Well, there's a lot of issues at play, right, here, and a lot of issues that we will discuss here on Men Going Home. And remember, like and follow us on The Man Live and True Crime Miami, and listen to our audio podcasts when on the run. Men Going Home on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcast entertainment.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Andy. Let's introduce our today's special guest, because our special guest today was convicted in 1991 for burglary, robbery, and kidnapping, and he received 3 life sentences. He was released from prison in July of 2020 after being incarcerated for 30 years in Florida's most violent prisons. However, people do change over time, and Freddie is not the same man who went to prison 30 years ago, and he is here today to tell his compelling story. Please welcome Freddie Morales. Welcome to the show, Freddie.
Thank you for having me here, Chris.
Freddie, you have a very interesting story. You were born in Miami at Jackson Memorial Hospital. You were raised in the Northwest neighborhoods and some of housing projects. Talk about that. I think you said that there were some crime-ridden neighborhoods. What was it like growing up in that part of town, back then in the 1970s?
Okay, I originally was raised up in Victory Homes, which is on 73rd Street and Northwest, like 3rd Avenue, 4th Avenue.
It's a tough neighborhood?
It's a tough neighborhood. It was a lot of drugs, violence. That's where the beginning of my growing up was, and it became more of a survival type of mentality for me growing up there. And I've seen a lot of crazy things going on, a lot of violence, a lot of uses of drugs.
What
and
was your
drinking.
earliest, and I'm sorry to interrupt, what was your earliest memory of seeing or being part of violence in that neighborhood?
Well, I remember this guy that I knew. He was shot up and became a vegetable. He was a friend that was within the neighborhood.
How old were you at that time?
Wow, I was like probably nine.
9
Wow.
years old?
Eight.
You
Wow.
and you witnessed that?
And I didn't get to witness what happened, but I got to witness who the person was, and then after seeing him on a wheelchair as a vegetable.
Let's talk about your family a little bit, because that's really, the basis of your formation. Now, your mother was a hardworking woman. She worked at a bar as long as you can remember, correct?
That's correct. She worked at a bar to do the best that she could to try to make provision for, our siblings, my mom, and she really didn't graduate from school or anything.
She had a third grade education,
yeah,
I
like
believe.
Third, fourth grade education, and so it was like kind of difficult for her because she was trying to do it on her own. I say that I had known many different stepfathers, and that during my time of growing up, and it was hard for her to manage us and try to manage and make the provisions that she was trying to make for us in that sense.
Now, in your early years, you did not know your father. Your mother worked at a bar, and you had 3 brothers and 2 sisters, correct?
That's correct.
So you didn't have a lot of income coming into the household. How did you guys get by?
The money that she was making from the working in the bar and stuff like that. Sometimes we would have to go to my grandmom's house to eat. There was times where I would have to go to my uncle or auntie's house to go eat and stuff like that. So it was, or sometimes we would just go to the neighbors if there was some things that we needed. We would ask for the.
Were you and your siblings unsupervised most of the time at a young age?
Yes, we were a lot unsupervised because Mom would when she comes, she would go to sleep after a long day of work, and then we would basically be on our own doing what we want. We were managing basically our lives.
Now, your mother's name was Blanca.
Blanca.
Was she a loving mother?
My mom, yeah, she was always loving. She loved us. She cared for us. She just was handed down a certain way of how to deal with life issues. And she was trying to do the best that she could with the little that she knew.
Right. So here she's managing a job, a single mother. You've got 5 children, and she's just doing the best she can. I believe at some point she actually told you when you were 5 or 6 years old that you're a man now. So what did that mean to you?
Well, as a kid, when I was about 5, 6 years old, I was already being told that I was a man. Man, don't cry. You're Puerto Rican. Be proud to be Puerto Rican. Anybody says anything about your mom or anything like that, you let them have it. If they're too big for you, you just grab something and hit them upside the head with it.
What number were you on the chain of the 5 kids?
The children.
I'm the knee baby. There's 6 of us, actually.
6. Okay.
And you were the youngest.
Youngest?
The second to the youngest.
Okay.
Now, I know money was tight, so I think I heard you say at one time that your brothers and sisters were sometimes sent to live with other relatives?
Well, one of my brothers was sent to live with his auntie because my mom, I guess she couldn't take care of him.
Right.
And so and my other brother, my little brother, Tony, he was sent to live with his grandmother and father.
Now, you didn't know your father?
No, I did not know my father.
For a period of time. Now, at a certain point, you figured out who your father was, correct?
Yes.
Which is an interesting story because the fact that you didn't have a father, you didn't have somebody who instilled discipline or guidance. You had none of that growing up. You were on your own. Now, your situation was a little unusual because it turned out, and correct me if I'm wrong, that your father, when you finally found out from what people were making comments over the years, your father turned out to actually be your uncle who was married to your auntie, correct?
Yes, he was my auntie's boyfriend. Correct.
And at some point, he had relations with your auntie, who turned out eventually was your mother.
he had a relationship with my mother.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's what.
Right.
That's
Before
where I
you
came
were
in.
born, obviously. Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
At what point did you discover this?
Yeah, when did you learn that?
Learn about that?
As I got old, like right about 20, right before I got incarcerated, I started kind of getting a little bit more of a clear understanding. And then right there is when I got incarcerated. It was right before going into the bid that I was given.
Not knowing, I assumed you learned earlier. So this man who was your father, so he was in no way any kind of a father figure to you growing up.
Not at all. He's an alcoholic, and so is my auntie. She's an alcoholic as well. And I remember going there as a little kid, and I would hear little things like, "Hey, mira tu hijo," which means, "Here, look, your son."
Oh.
You know what I'm saying? But never registered to me what it was. I could recall one time I went to Puerto Rico. Both my auntie and him were supposed to be taking me to go meet my so-called father. And not me, I didn't know at that time that he was my father. And I would ask him, "Hey, when are you gonna go take me to go see my father?" And so I said, "Don't worry about it. Don't worry. We're gonna take you." Because my mom always told me that my father's name was Miguel Serrano, some wrestler.
Right.
And so what you find in there is there was this quest, this desire within me to know who my father was.
So did question I have is, did this man ever provide any financial support to you or your mother?
That I know of, no.
Was there ever, even when you turned 20, was there ever any kind of an explanation or discussion among your families to help you understand the situation?
Prior to me getting arrested, I tried to like talk to him, and he was kind of like, he smiled about it and kind of like made a joke, like a joke
about it. Yeah,
a joke about it. But I think it was because maybe of the shame, the guilt, and it trying not to create any issue between my mom and my auntie, which were sisters.
Is he still alive?
Yes, he's alive.
Do you have any relationship with him now?
No, but what was interesting was that I was thinking that I was going to have the opportunity that after the show, drive by there and get a little closure. But unfortunately, I talked to my probation officer yesterday, and he had told me that at one point that, yeah, you can go wherever you want when you get over there. I think he did I wanted a little clearance on it. Then he called me back later and said, "No, I think you just have to go to the podcast. From the podcast, you're going to have to go to your family house, be there with your family, and then go to the memorial sites to go visit the family members that passed away during the time you was in incarceration."
That is that something you would like to do? You would like to gain closure with that situation?
Well, I spoke with my lawyer about it, and we're going to probably talk to my judge to see if she could afford me that opportunity.
So you didn't have a father figure growing up, and I'm guessing that you probably think that had a lot to do with you living on the streets and living the life of crime that you did, and maybe a feeling of abandonment.
Well, absolutely. I think I was searching for my identity, and I went to find it in the wrong places. So that's correct.
Let's talk about. All right. So now you're starting to develop a life in crime is developing, right? And in part, you were growing up in a tough neighborhood. You were smoking marijuana at the age of 7,
yes.
Drinking alcohol at the age of 8. Talk about that.
Yeah, this was a norm where I lived at. It was not a big thing, and so you would always have the older guys. They would, just hand you a joint, or they hand you some beer. And in my family, drinking was not an issue because it was part of our family. So that was like a sign of manhood when you were able to drink, and that's what began to happen. That just started a snowball.
Well, before the show, you showed me a picture of you at a very young age. I'm not sure how old you were. You were drinking a can of Schlitz malt liquor Bull.
Yeah, that was a picture of me.
Malt liquor, yeah.
Yeah, that was a picture of me and my dog Champ.
So influencing you would be your family members, people you live near.
Yeah, and also within the neighborhood.
Right.
It's almost like a macho thing if you're drinking.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So here you are, 5, 6 years old. you're 7, 8 years old. You're drinking alcohol. You're smoking marijuana. You have no guidance. Nobody's really acting as a father figure. And I believe now you start entering into a life of crime. You start breaking into automobiles and breaking into homes, correct?
That's correct.
Talk about that.
Yeah. First of all, before getting to the breaking into, I started stealing bikes, little things like that, stealing stuff out of the stores. And eventually, gradually, I started going into breaking into cars and things like that.
So you're stealing bicycles, breaking into cars, breaking into homes. Are you selling what you're stealing to make money?
Yeah.
How does that work?
I would get stuff, get it, sell it, to buy, my marijuana, my drugs and stuff like that. And sometimes to just get little stuff to eat, because there was times at home where, there was nothing to eat.
Right.
So it was all a money issue, really. The stealing and the starting into crime was about getting money, surviving, you think?
It was more getting money, surviving to, I thought I was this man, but I just didn't understand how to deal with my life issues. I didn't know how to do things appropriately.
No, you were pretty young at the time.
Well,
so.
yeah. I mean, you didn't have a father,
right?
So there's nobody to teach you right from wrong, appropriate versus inappropriate, how to handle yourself in social situations. You were in the dark. You had no guidance at all.
Yeah, and what I later realized is I lacked a lot of exposure to how to do things appropriately.
Right.
Yeah.
Did your mother know about your criminal activity at this age, or could she just not handle you or do anything about that?
Well, with her trying to, most parents sometimes think just making provision, and that's more than sufficient at times, or they're just so consumed with trying to make the provision that it opens the door for you for me to do what it is that I wanted to do, and what I wanted to do was the only thing that I learned to do was the things that I was taught to do within the neighborhood.
It's very interesting when I researched your life and looked through your crimes. It must be a common pattern, Andy, because you're stealing from cars, nonviolent, offenses, but slowly over the years and that it becomes more violent over time, and that must be a common pattern, no?
And I found that the reason for that is oftentimes you get introduced to other people share their ideas, or you move into different neighborhoods and you get involved with different type of people, and they kind of introduce you to things that you were not familiar. And so my mind was open to evil and doing wrong anyways, because that's all I ever knew. So that was not a big issue. And that was easy for me to do because that's all I really was I knew to do.
Right. So you're breaking into cars, breaking into homes. Then you graduated to grand theft auto. And then you get caught. To talk about that.
At a very early age, I started going to juvenile. I could tell you probably I don't know if it was 9 or 10 years old. I was already headed into a juvenile system for breaking into cars and things.
So that's why you went to DeSoto Juvenile and Okeechobee State School, because you got caught breaking into homes?
The first time I think it was I went to DeSoto Start Center, which was a program. And so that was for breaking into cars. And I think it was another episode where it was either a burglary or something of that nature, where I went to state school.
And what were these state schools like? Were they violent? How long were you at them?
I think I was there about 8 to 9 months. And yes, there was violence. As a matter of fact, we had a riot there, all because, I recall this, over there they would wash your clothes or your underwears or stuff like that.
Right.
And they just threw them, and you would have your number on it, and they threw them all in the locker room where you just go pick it out. And I remember I had a pair of underwears. I think it was even Fruit of Balloons.
Right.
And that I had a number 13. And I said, somebody grabbed them. And I said, whoever grabbed them, give them up. If not, if I catch you with them on, we're going to have a problem. Well, that went into someone putting them on, having them on. I found out who it was. And that led to one thing to another. And before we know it, we was in a riot just because of that within the dorm.
Wow.
A
lot of violence at the juvenile
yes,
centers?
There was a lot of violence.
As much as in a prison, you think?
Well, I think prison has become more violent all the more, and it's transitioned to another level.
But at age 16, you did go to prison. You were direct filed. So my understanding is when you're direct filed, you were 16, but you were sentenced as an adult, correct?
Correct.
What happened? What did you do?
I had committed a burglary, and I guess the juvenile system was kind of like tired with me, and they just went ahead and direct filed me to the Dade County Jail, and so they treated me as an adult.
Do you know how many times you were in juvenile court before that?
I think I was there something like three times, about
Okay.
3 or 4 times, everything.
So you didn't go to a prison. You went to Miami-Dade County Jail downtown.
I did go to Miami-Dade County Jail. Later was sentenced to a 2 years to prison as I think as a youthful offender or something like that.
And which prison did you go to at the age of 16?
I went to Indian River.
Was that an adult facility or was that for juveniles?
That was youthful offender.
Youthful offender?
Yeah. They had guys from like 25 down, I believe,
But did you spend all 2 years at Indian River? Weren't you transferred to Sumter?
Well, I was in Indian River for, I don't remember if it was a year, and I went to work release. They sent me to work release. From work release, I was there for a couple of months. I got into some trouble at work release. That's when they sent me to Sumter.
And you referred to Sumter as Gladiator School. Talk about that.
Yeah, they call Sumter well, back then when I was there, they called it the Baby Rock, because what was happening, most of the people who were coming out of the Rock, the Florida State Prison, they were sending them all there, and they were mixing them in with the youthful offenders. And so there was, again, these youthful offenders being introduced to a lot of madness, and so there's now the youthful offenders trying to behave like the other guys,
Right.
and so it's kind of like just mixed it.
And
all
how
up.
old were you? You were what, about 17 at that point?
I think I was either going on 17 or somewhere within 16. Yeah.
But and so it was a similar dynamic then, as from your youth. Here you are with older people that are influencing you, probably in a bad way. Do you think, for lack of a better term, you became more of a criminal when you went to that facility?
Oh, most definitely. What I found in prison is that when you're there, people are always sharing their ideas of how they did their crime. And as a criminal, you would think, well, I'm just going to do it a better way than the way that he explained to me. Because if he got caught for this, but he did get some money, so I'll just do it this way without the element of getting caught.
Gotcha.
So
Right. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I think you learned in prison how to steal a car, because there was a car, it was locked, and you shook the car till the car alarm went off and the people came out, and you said, "Give me the keys," and you held a gun to them.
yeah, this was a story that was this was a guy who shared something with me while I was in a work release center.
Right.
And he had told me that he went to go rob somebody for their car. It was a nice car with some nice rims and things like that.
Right.
And he instructed me on how he did it. And so I found myself in that position, and that was like in 1989, if I'm mistaken. He shared that with me.
1991, I believe, yeah.
In 1989, when he shared that with me, and in 1991, when I went to commit my crime, I thought about what he shared with me, and
Wow.
it was no longer just something that he shared with me. It became a reality.
Right.
And that became something very detrimental to my future, my life.
And we will talk
I'll
about
say.
that. But however, let's jump back to 1987, because you had gotten out of Sumter. You're out. You're 18 years old, and you did your first home, or it might not have been your first home invasion. It was the first one you got caught at, because you had heard somebody had 2 kilos of cocaine, which by my calculation could be worth somewhere between $100,000 and $120,000. And you did a home invasion to get that. Talk about that experience.
Well, we went to go rob this guy because a friend of mine told me, hey, this is what's there. And when I went to do that, there was someone there. And when the lady opened the door, I got my gun and I told her, hey, and I grabbed her and I said, where's the drugs at? She was like, "There's no drugs here. There's no drugs here." And so I knew where they put the drugs at because I was instructed where it was at.
Right.
And I took her upstairs where it was, and we looked in there, and it happened to have been removed. So I was a little bit upset at that, and I found that there was nothing there. So I just, whatever jewelry, whatever things I could get, I got on my way out. And I share this not to glorify my crime
Of
or
course.
anything, and I'm deeply remorseful for the things that I've done because I understand that that was not the thing to do, and I was not in the right mindset when I did those things. So to my victims, I have deep regret and deep remorse for that.
So you were convicted on that of burglary, armed robbery, and kidnapping. First of all, how did they catch you? How did they catch you, and why did they include kidnapping in there?
Are you asking me about the 1980s?
When you were 18 years old.
It seems as though that there was the individual, this is my thought, and I'm not certain, but I feel like the individual who sent me there was the individual who eventually sent the police to come get me.
Oh.
And so they didn't catch me in the crime, when the crime took place. I was home one day, and the detectives
How
were
much
looking
later
for me.
was it?
I think it was about a month or two later when they came and arrested me.
So
at
you
my home.
you were convicted. You got 12 years for that. Where did they send you to prison?
I got 12 years. In those 12 years, I was sent to Lake Correction Institution.
Right.
Yes.
But you only did 2.5 years. So how do you get sentenced to 12, but you only do 2.5?
Well, during that time, they had a 65%. And what
Okay.
they were doing, they would take a third from your sentence, and they were honoring you with incentive gain time with CRD. I think something like 120 days during that time. One of the things that I discovered is I went in and came out. So they sent me to a work release center, and nothing was really required of me. Most of your, before I went to the work release center, they send you normally to a work camp. And in your work camp, what you'll find there is that oftentimes it's a place where people are always trying to figure out, how can I get some drugs?
Right.
Because you have people who go out on DOT and stuff like that, or you get your girl. I used to get my girl, Ray, bring me something, you know what I'm saying, and things like that, and so I had those type of situations. So I was still in my getting high, I was still in my criminal mentality, and so when I did those 2.5 years, I was still actively involved in my criminal behavior.
I got you.
And drug abuse was
And drug
it was a rampant problem within that circle.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. That our aim and our goal was, how do we get high?
Here's a question, because you're not done with your criminal activity. However, you've been caught numerous times at whatever you've done. So at some point, did you ever think, geez, maybe I'm not very good at this, I should change careers?
Different profession, maybe?
I would consider myself too dumb to have thought of something like that.
All right, so you do the 2.5 years, you
yeah.
get out, you're not quite done. So in April of 1991, you do another home invasion. And this is where you learned what you learned in prison about stealing cars, and because there was a car you wanted to steal that had some expensive rims. And then you got caught at this as well, but it's an interesting story. Talk about what happened.
I think here's another pattern. Someone else tells me, "Hey, I know where this car is at, and I know you're fixing your car and you want to put your, some rims on it."
Right.
And so I know where this place is at, So he gave me the idea of where it was at and to go get it. What he didn't tell me was it had an alarm. And so when I went to go get the car, I found out that it had an alarm. And before I share that, I just want to make sure that it's understood for my victims,
Right.
that it hurt me to even think or talk about those type of things, because it was not fair to them for me to do what I did to them in committing my crime. And I share with them my deep regrets and my deep remorse, and they had accepted. So I just really thank God that they were open to that. So I went to their place. The car had alarm, and what I was sharing with you guys about in 1989, guy shared something with me.
Right.
I did what the guy told me. I hit the car alarm went off. The guy came out, and when he comes out, I point a gun at him. I said, "Give me the keys," because my intent was just basically, "Give me the keys. I'm going to take the car. I'm going to leave."
You're out of there.
That was my idea. Well, he didn't have the keys on him, and he said the keys are in the house. So I got him by gunpoint, took him into the house, and when I took him into the house, his wife came out with a knife, screaming, frightened, terrified because she has her husband with a gun
pointing at him.
Right.
Yeah.
And I turned to her because she was coming towards my way, so I pointed the gun at her, and I told her, "Just step away." So he took a swing at me. Him and I got into a scuffle. I pinned him up against the wall, and I told her, "I just want the keys. That's it. Give me the keys. I'm gone." So she backed up and ran into the room, grabbed the keys, gave me the keys. I got the keys. I backed out, shut the door, jumped into the car, and I left from that point.
That scuffle, you had a loaded gun
I
in
had
your
a
hand.
loaded gun in my hand.
You had a gun pointed at his head, correct?
That's correct.
Now, you get 2 blocks away, all of a sudden you see a police car, and they see you.
Yes.
So they must have called the police, correct?
That's correct.
And what happened?
And shortly after that, they turned on their lights, and there was a high-speed chase between them and I. And I went up on A26.
826, the Palmetto
I went up
Expressway.
Palmetto Expressway, where the cars were exiting, and I went up, and shortly after that, I ran into another car head-on, and I had a head-on collision. And there, the car folded in half.
Were you
Wow.
injured?
I was injured. I broke my tibia, my fibia. I was in and out of conscience.
The car
The
caught
car
on
was
fire,
in
right?
flame.
Yeah.
I was no longer this Superman guy. I was no longer this tough guy, this guy that could just, do whatever he want. And I was there hopeless. And had not some good Samaritans would pull over and pull me out of, I wouldn't be here sharing this with you guys.
You go to trial, and a judge now this time, forget the 1 year and the 2 year sentences. You get 3 life sentences for burglary, robbery, and kidnapping. Correct?
That's correct. I'm facing the judge, and the judge gives me 3 life sentences, and he also hits me with a habitual sanction as well.
What does that mean?
That means if you have a 30-year sentence and they habitualize you, it could hit you up with 60. They double it up. And so it means that you've made basically a career out of crime.
Right.
And so then therefore what we're going to do is we're going to just give you a career, a place to stay for the rest of your life.
And the kidnapping was just moving him from outside to inside the
Right.
house? Is that how that works?
Yeah, it was for moving him from the outside into the house. There was some discrepancies with that because the original intent was just for
To get the keys.
To get the keys. There
Right.
was nothing else committed after that. And so, but anyways, that was a charge, in my opinion, and in the opinions of others, that was just thrown into the equation.
Right.
However, that's of the past, and we're in the future, and it's.
Well, and the
Did you have
lights-
if I could, did you have a public defender as a
No,
your
I
lawyer?
actually had a private attorney at that time, and he highlighted the fact that was not something that should have been there.
However, the life sentences were served concurrently, so it really didn't matter, correct?
right.
Yeah, that's right. They
Right.
were.
They could have given you 5 life sentences, just 1 life sentence.
Yes. Well, the difficulty, if you win one, then you still got the other 4.
Yeah.
Right.
So when you go
Okay.
through the appellate process.
Right.
Question. You're 21 years old. You're standing in front of a judge, and he sentences you to 3 life sentences. What went through your mind when he sentenced you to life?
When I reflect upon that, I was still holding on to the image that I'm a man and I could handle these things. This was just another thing. You know what I'm saying? It didn't really register the profoundness of the sentence. It was, I've dealt with these things before, so it really didn't hit me like some would think at that time. Later on, it started coming around and becoming a real reality to me.
You really had one other episode before you changed. I think at 24 you changed. You said, I got so tired of making a mess out of my life that you just wanted to change, and you were 24. However, right before that happened, there was you were the houseman to a cell with 24 inmates, correct?
Yes.
Now, a houseman means you're in charge, you're the boss.
Basically, yes. Dade County Jail.
This is a consequence of your prisonization, really, because some new guy came into the cell and he started talking to the other guys. He wanted to become the boss, right?
That's right.
What did you do?
Well, what happened with that was that he was trying to poison the minds of the other guys, the young guys that were there, and so that they can take over the cell. And basically what happened was that I was waiting already to get sent to prison. I was in that process where I just got sentenced. So I kind of like heard that over and over, him poisoning the young guys' minds to, create that situation. And being a houseman, it kind of like feeds your ego as well, because it makes you say like, you got a reputation,
You're the king of the hill.
You're the boss.
So, yeah, exactly. So, and I just got up that day and I was already frustrated and angry with the fact that I'm going to spend the rest of my life in prison.
Right.
I'm going to die in here, and I got up and I had some razor blades that you call in Spanish called un entisao.
So you made a weapon.
Made a weapon, and I went out there and I cut the dude up.
How bad?
I cut him up pretty bad, from the neck all the way down to his feet. And it was because when he fell back, he was kicking up, and I was just cutting. And I think what happened to me, I got blinded because he had a red jacket on, so I couldn't see if there was any blood or not in that sense.
And this is in Miami-Dade County Jail.
This was at Miami-Dade County Jail. I was found guilty for that. They gave me a 15-year sentence.
15-year sentence.
Yes. And he basically created the situation, didn't give me the right to go ahead and do what I did.
Right. You said you learned this is when I thought you were starting to change, because this is where you're starting your transition. You were 24 years old, and it seemed as though, you learned a very valuable lesson, which I want to hear. And is this when you first felt remorse? Had you felt remorse about anything before?
Yes, I have felt remorse. A matter of fact, I was so desirous to get out of the Dade County Jail because it's a dungeon. It's like a cave.
Yeah,
and
I've
it's
been
just
there.
constantly, tension there always. And it's just very aggravating. It's a place of hopelessness.
About a 10-story building, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And very violent, as violent as
Very
any
violent.
prison you've been
Yeah,
to?
It's things where it would ignite at any moment. And so what I found was that I just wanted to get away from there, where I could probably get to a prison where I could get away from, a lot of the tension that was you lived in tension in and out, day in and day out. And so when I went to South Florida, I started finding myself wanting to transition a little. I wanted to, but Dade County Jail was not the place.
But after you cut that guy up, what was the lesson you learned from it? You didn't think you did the right thing, but I think you said you learned a lesson, right? That you didn't own the cell, and it wasn't really your place.
Yeah,
it wasn't your place to do
that's
that.
That's right. Yeah. I started realizing that, hey, none of this is yours.
Right.
You could make yourself want to be the owner of this stuff, but it's not. And I started kind of like reconsidering, what am I fighting for?
Right.
Something that's not even mine, and I don't even know how to fight for what is right.
So in prison, how important is it to be respected and to be feared?
Oh, that's like a code of honor, really, because being respected in that sense says something about you, and it helps you just kind of like go through prison without a lot of the problems.
So where did you go when you sentenced to 3 life sentences? Which prison did they send you? Because you did 30 years.
Okay, well, the first prison they sent me was to DeSoto Correction Institution.
Okay.
And I was there for about a year. And after being there for a year, I had to go to South Florida Reception Center for about because I had to get some screws and taken out of my right
Your leg.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So here's the question. So you did 30 years in prison. How did you survive 30 years in prison?
How I survived my 30 years in prison, I realized that there had to be a change in my life. And I began to seek that change. And one of the things that I started getting involved, I started just normally like going to the chapel department and stuff like that. And later I got involved in programs. I got involved in, AA, NA, and I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And I started getting involved in activities in the church services and just making myself available. Later, I started getting involved. I worked to get my GED. I went to life skills.
Right.
And I started feeling like, hey, you can do this.
You can get out at some point.
You can get out. You can become a valuable person. I think I had to kind of like face my fears, but grab the tools that I needed to overcome them.
So your life sentence, that was 25 years mandatory?
No, my life sentence was never getting out without any parole eligibility.
Right, because you didn't fall under the parole system, right?
I did not fall under the parole
So
system.
you were sentenced to life without the possibility of parole?
Sentenced to life without possible.
So how were you eligible to get out?
Yeah.
Well, this would be a divine act from God.
Yeah.
Because it eventually became a mitigating factor that was dealt with, and eventually I was released on that
But
basis.
what was the
What
factor?
was that?
The fact I came before the court with the fact that my attorney had not conveyed a plea to me that was conveyed to him by the state, and I didn't know anything about it. Had I known it, I would have took the plea. And so
my God.
that was the issue. There's discrepancy with that.
Do you think you would have taken that plea if you had been presented with it at the time?
Well, if they would have laid the fact that you either get this 30-year plea or you get a 3 life sentence, of course I would.
What,
Yeah,
maybe I
sure.
missed something. What was the plea that he didn't offer you?
There was a 30-year plea deal that was.
And he didn't tell you?
He told my ex-wife. Well, she was my wife then, but he told who is my ex-wife now about a plea, but it was never conveyed to me.
Wow. That is an act of God because, I only work with guys from the Corrections Transition Program usually, and it's 25 years mandatory, not life without the possibility of parole.
Right.
Now, you're an ordained minister now. Talk a little bit about who was the old Freddie Morales, and who is Freddie Morales today?
Well, I share with you this idea that I had a friend of mine that I grew up with at Largemart. We grew up in Largemart, and I taught him how to steal his first bike, and we were in Belglades, and he would just sit there and say, "You're not the same person that I grew up with. I mean, you're like totally different, you know." He said, I don't. It's like I'm not talking to a different person." And I shared with him. I said that this is what God can do. He'll change your life. And he's a Latin king, so he was like, I was trying to get him, to retire. And I'm like, hey, listen, And he said when he got 40, he would do it. But my life became an instrument to help others change, because I didn't want them to go through what I had gone through, or to ever be in a predicament that I was in. And my predicament was, I'm never getting out of prison, because I made a lot of poor choices in my life that has pulled me away from my family, has pulled me away from the ones that love me and want me to be there, and stuff like that. And I may not ever be there.
Do you like doing that? Do you like counseling a young person? I mean, someone younger than you, obviously, in the Latin Kings.
I like anyone that I can help. Is some, whatever God has given me, I give to the other people as well.
Right.
I've given it to the old ones, and I've given it to the young ones.
Well, see, I think the concern you had is you were not a part of the Corrections Transition Program, so you've really had no transitional training, because so you've been in for 30 years and they're basically said, okay, you can get out now. And I think you're concerned about not having that transitional training. And now you're at the halfway house in Lake Worth called Anchor House, run by our friend John Eddings. Talk about the transitional aspect that you're now getting at the halfway house.
Before I talk about that, I just want to share that even though I was not in those transitional things. I had told myself this: I would not wait till I get out to get ready. I'll
Well,
be getting
good.
ready
That was
before
smart.
I get out. And so I felt as though that, I needed to condition myself for a moment if and when the opportunity was ever given to me, that I won't have to be going through all that. So I am at the Anchor House. I've been transitioned. The judge found that that was an adequate place for me to be.
Okay.
I'm there. It's very helpful. It has helped me to become the responsible person that I need to be to transition into society. It's giving me opportunities to furthermore find my identity as a man, doing the things that a responsible man has to do to live in society. And so I share, if I would have lived at my sister's house, who would have been doing the laundry? If I lived at my sister's house, who would have been doing the cooking and paying the bills? And so I kind of like looked at that and said, you know what? I thank God that I was put into this Anchor House, because there I'm learning how to pay my bills. There I'm learning how to transition as a man and do things independently. And that also helps me to face the fears or the idea that maybe I felt that I couldn't do at one point in my life. Because when you smoke marijuana at the age of 8 years old and you're just going through it does work with your self-esteem.
Right.
And so now it was like an honor now when I went to go get my Chase bank account, savings
Right.
account.
Those are big, big accomplishments for you
sure,
now.
for sure.
How long have you been out?
I've been out now 8 months.
And
8
and
months.
you're wearing an ankle bracelet now.
And I am currently wearing an ankle bracelet.
And how does that work? What happens?
And I'm supposed to be within what it is, the West Palm Beach County only. I have a curfew at 9:00, and I always say this, probation is not for the undisciplined. Probation this is for the person who's disciplined, and that's why it's important to not be waiting to get ready. But
Are you employed now? Do you have work?
I am currently employed with Regal Paint Store. The owner, he came before the judge and requested that upon my release, he's not only going to get a place, that we're going to get the Anchor House so I could come there, and also he was going to furnish me with a job. So I got out on the 31st of July. On August 10th, I was already working.
God bless him. In the middle of a pandemic, too, might I add.
Yes.
And the good news is you're a warehouse assistant, and you must be doing a good job, because this is the first job you got when you got out, and you still have it.
Yes, they know I work hard, and I have every reason. And I'm just grateful for everything, and for the opportunity, the second chance of life. And
You're an ordained minister, so talk about when you allowed religion into your life, and how has it changed your life?
Well, I know that I needed the Lord to help me, because all my decisions and ideas and ways of thinking were not something healthy at all. And I just cried out to him, and I accepted him as my Lord and Savior. And from there, it was not a piece of cake. There was still a lot of demons that I had to fight off, but I moved towards trusting and believing in him, and the doors begin to open. I began to see the fruits of doing what was right. I began to enjoy the fruits of what was, and I began to find myself doing things that I never imagined I would be doing, speaking into the lives of men, speaking into the life of congregation, not only men that were incarcerated, but also volunteers as well.
If you could speak to a room full of young men, at-risk youth, 17, 18 years old, like you were, what would you tell them so that they don't make the same mistakes that you've made?
Well, I know that oftentimes in life we feel that we have the answers to life, and we think we know it all, and we think that maybe the older guy or our parents don't really know much about life. And what I found with that is that for some reasons, parents and older people have had some sort of experience with life that kind of helps us understand why we shouldn't go down those paths that oftentimes we want to go down. So it's always good to listen to good advice, and don't look at it as though you got it together. There's a proverb saying, if you want to know what's ahead, ask the ones that are coming back,
Right.
what's ahead because they know what was ahead.
Well, if you're fortunate enough to have access to that good, those good role models and people to give you those opinions,
And
right?
let me tell you, good that you said that, because the fact is that while I was in prison, there were those people. Had not it been for the volunteers, had it not been for transitional programs, had it not been for, someone that was standing despite how difficult and ugly the situation was, that they were making these provisions. Because if not, I wouldn't have the understanding that I have today. So I applaud the people that
Right.
do go in there, take their time to try to make some balance. It can't just be punishment. There has to be something else.
And I noticed too that
Wow.
you're giving back now that you're out, so that actually you're becoming an asset of your community rather than a liability of the state. I read that you're feeding the homeless on Saturdays.
Yes, we feed the homeless on Saturday. There's Burrito Project. Randy Sprouter, he's the one who runs
Okay.
it. So I have the
And
opportunity
you're
with
giving
that.
away free Bibles.
And we give free Bibles with Chad Winter as well. So, and I had the opportunity to meet the mayor of Lake Worth, and I had the opportunity to take a picture with her.
Very good, very good. And then I also read that you're speaking to some law school classes about doing some Q&A for them as well.
University of Miami, and also Todd Bass is a
Right.
professor at the University of Miami. I had the chance to speak with the classes there as well.
Well, we're about to wrap up. You've been a fantastic guest. I hope you'll come back. And you are truly a changed man, and I congratulate you. So thank you for being on our show today.
And you're welcome, and all honor and glory be unto my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And thank you for you guys, the service you guys are doing to help men going home.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Andy, last comment?
I mean, what an amazing transformation story. Freddie Morales here. I mean, I'm blown away by it. And I think we're going to hear a lot more about Freddie Morales, maybe a lot more photos with politicians. We'll see a lot more of those probably in the near future, I bet.
Well said. Well said. Well, that does it for today. And thank you all so much for tuning in for another episode of Men Going Home here at the studios of The Man Live in Miami. And a very special thank you to Dr. Regina Sheeran, David Goodwin, and John Eddings. Thank you all so much for supporting the show. And thank you all so much for watching. See you next week here at Men Going Home.